Welcome to The Deep End by On Deck, a podcast for visionary builders, creators, and thinkers discuss world-changing stories and ideas. I'm your host, Marshall Kozlov.
There was a hailing of technology in the beginning days where the tech press was cheerleading. And they believed in these companies because they were disrupting the old institutions. Banking, media, whatever, finance, all these institutions, that real estate, taxis, right? That had been sort of unchecked and became like hostile to people because of their stance as these entrenched incumbents. And so to cheerlead tech was essentially to be for the little guy and to try to push back against these institutions. And I think that people lost sight of that, and they thought the idea was only to tell these like one-sided narratives about why tech was great, and then as that was happening, tech became the big guy.
On Deck is where ambitious people worldwide go to start companies, find their next roles, and invest in their careers. The Deep End invites the founders, operators, and investors from the On Deck community and beyond to turn their experiences into the ideas others need to start their own odysseys. Joining me in the Deep End today is Alex Kantrowitz. Alex is a reporter who contributes to CNBC, hosts the Big Technology podcast, and writes the Big Technology newsletter, which includes reports and analysis on companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and Apple. Alex is an independent reporter with a background working at media publications like BuzzFeed and is optimistic about the impact of tech on the world. As such, he occupies a unique vantage point as a member of both tech and media, two groups that don't always get along. Our discussion explores this dynamic by diving into how the relationship between tech and media evolved over time and resurfacing some of the more overlooked reasons why media coverage of tech has soured. We also explore the state of tech media today in a world when many companies are attempting to tell their own stories and why it's harder to do this than most companies realize. We also discuss the business of content creation. Alex is a big advocate in building quality relationships with an audience that keeps them coming back as a healthy way to make a living as a creator and questions the conventional wisdom of advertising being an inherently evil revenue model. Alex is a multifaceted person, so we cover a lot of ground. Everything from why the inside story of Elon Musk making his bid for Twitter will make a great TV series one day, to the state of the market, to how Twitter destroyed Vine by refusing to pay creators. It's a great episode for anyone interested in getting a bird's eye view of tech and media today. Let's dive in. Alex Kantrowitz, welcome to The Deep End.
Thank you, Marshall. I'm a fan of the show, and it's great to be here with you.
Yeah, great to be with you too. I've had you on a bunch of realignment episodes. I think this is the first time I've ever properly pronounced your name. I tend to smush it. Kantrowitz. So this is very exciting. So you are a reporter. You host the Big Technology podcast. You write the Big Technology newsletter, and you are a contributor to CNBC. Is that the full stack that you would describe yourself as a reporter right now?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so this is going to be a random episode since we know each other. I just want to throw a bunch of things to you. So right now, and we'll have a proper intro that will contextualize everything. Right now, I'm sure you've noticed that we are in the era of the high production streaming service tech story. You've got the Theranos story, you've got WeWork, and you, of course, have Uber. Do you which of those is your favorite as a tech reporter?
I can't watch them. I can't watch Silicon Valley. They're all too close to home. And, when you've lived in the bubble for so long, like when you kick back and turn on the TV, watching more tech stuff, at least from my perspective, is too much. So, big into Squid Game. I've seen some great I had COVID at the end of the year and saw some great dating shows on Netflix. But beyond that, I haven't gotten into these shows about the tech world. That said, I hope they do really well because one day I'd like to write something and maybe turn that into TV. And the people who are out there making these shows are setting the precedent for the rest of us. But yeah, I haven't gotten into these shows yet.
when you put it that way, it makes total sense. It's why, for example, I don't watch any politics shows. I don't watch any news about news shows in terms of drama. So I totally get that. So here's the question then. To your point about wanting to tell these sort of stories, you actually previously did a deal with Vox/Recode. So you were doing a narrative scripted podcast. You've been covering the Valley, at BuzzFeed before you went independent, but you've done basically 2 years of stories since basically COVID. Of what you've covered so far, what do you think is the story that you think could make a TV show that gets you a massive streaming deal someday?
Well,
not even
Elon,
you personally.
yeah.
So separate you. So what is an example of a story that you want to do?
I mean, Elon Musk, the inside story of Elon Musk making this bid for Twitter, and it's not even over. So I think that is the most dramatic story that has emerged in terms of the companies that I cover in the past 2 years. And especially if you could take a little creative license, you could really end up writing some amazing plot points. I mean, just think about it. So Jack Dorsey was the CEO like a minute ago. He gets pushed out by an activist investor pretty much, leaves the company, puts it in the hands of this guy, Parag Agrawal. And, basically things are calm for about 30 seconds until Elon gets involved with the backing of Jack and Parag. And then Elon, first wants to take this board seat and then says, actually, they push back on him. I mean, I don't even know what happened there. I'm still working to figure out why he didn't end up taking the board seat. Perhaps he didn't think it was influential enough. He's out, and then he makes an offer for the company and says he doesn't have faith in management, right? Which is the management that Jack Dorsey put into place. And Jack then goes and says that Elon Musk is the singular solution that can help Twitter come to, fulfill its promise, and backs him while the CEO is still sitting there. The board says, we don't want you to buy the company. Then the board says, we do want you to buy the company. And we still have potentially another 5.5 months until this deal closes. And now Elon might want to take it public again after taking it private. It is an insane story with amazing characters, with drama, with backstabbing, and with consequence. And I feel like that is actually what would make an amazing show.
Did you ever watch The Social Network?
I did. That I watched a couple times.
What made this, because this conversation keeps happening, and a lot of, let's say, people in the tech audience are not happy with the newest slate of shows. I think there's a lot of, tech versus media dynamics playing out there. But what made The Social Network work from your perspective? The one thing everyone agrees on, whether you like Facebook or not, that movie works. Like, what makes you think it works as a storyteller?
Justin Timberlake. No, I'm kidding. Fine. Justin Timberlake was
There's
great
something
in
to
that movie.
There's something to that.
I maybe that's, there's truth to every joke. Look, I think that two things. First of all, Mark Zuckerberg is an extremely compelling character. You can't, 3-point-something billion people use Facebook products every month. So we all have a relationship with Mark Zuckerberg, whether we like it or not. And I would say probably a good chunk of those 3-point-something billion. And I would say probably almost all of your users have an opinion about him. And he is a unique individual. And I just happen to think that he's a great character. And so watching his plotting, him like taking the idea and running with it and being sort of unapologetic about doing it. Like what great movies have, a good setup and basically run with conflict the entire movie, and then they have an interesting resolution. And like the setup is amazing, right? Harvard dorm setting, right? You have this, nerd boy king Zuckerberg. There's conflict all the way through. And within the conflict, there's also this amazing amount of growth that all of us experienced when we got onto the platform. And resolution, we're still living in it. So I think it's a terrific story.
The thing that comes through during these debates about tech and media is that there's a lot of emphasis in my side of the world on tech media not telling these exciting, inspirational stories. Once again, there's a lot of folks who you could be a total normie and watch The Social Network and be like, oh man, like these guys are monsters. This is terrible. But a lot of people I know in the Valley actually watched that movie and then got off the next flight to Palo Alto. So like, what do you think about this argument about whether there are positive stories to be told that aren't just purely nitpicky or this bad thing happened? How do you think about that debate?
There's definitely positive stories to be told. I have an idea of why the press has gone largely to more critical stories. There was a hailing of technology in the beginning days where the tech press was cheerleading, and they believed in these companies because they were disrupting the old institutions, banking, media, whatever, finance. Well, banking is finance, but all these institutions, that real estate, taxis, right, that had been sort of unchecked and became hostile to people because of their stance as these entrenched incumbents. And so to cheerlead tech was essentially to be for the little guy and to try to push back against these institutions. And I think that people lost sight of that, and they thought the idea was only to tell these one-sided narratives about why tech was great. And then as that was happening, tech became the big guy. The 5 biggest companies in the US are all technology companies, right? You had Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft making up more than 25% of the S&P 500 for a good amount of time. You had Uber and Lyft for a while kicking the crap out of taxi companies. You had Twitter, and let's go back to Facebook, Google, to basically, doing some good for media companies, but also a lot of harm. And when people started to come to the realization that these companies had become the new kings, the tech press felt like it got caught with its pants down. And I think that, as is natural, that the journalists will look at power and try to ask questions about power. And now tech was fighting power. Now tech is the power. So I think you see a much more of a tendency to criticize those things than there used to be to applaud. Another thing is that these companies, think about Facebook, connect the world, Twitter, let you know what's happening right now. The global consciousness, as Jack Dorsey just called it. Amazon, convenience to customers. Apple. Apple's not just a phone company. Apple is a heal the world company. They all have this messianic framing, and I think a lot of that came from when they were the little guy fighting against the big guy. Apple famously the 1984 commercial for Apple, where someone throws this hammer into the big incumbents, and that's supposed to resemble Apple. They had promised something better, and in some ways they have been better, but in many ways they've just taken along the same path that powerful institutions have, and there's a big argument to be made that they haven't lived up to their ideals. Lastly, part of this is due to the fact that tech led to changes that transformed the way stories are told about companies. So when it used to be that we didn't really have an ability to easily publish online, you would have to have magazines like A Fast Company, for instance, that would glorify startups, because who else was going to do that? Now the startups have all hired their own writers, and they're telling these stories about themselves. So the place for people to lionize, for journalists to lionize these companies, has been replaced actually by the company's own internal press departments themselves. And you add that all up together, and you get this situation where people are like, the tech press is only negative, and they hate us, and us versus the tech press. And I think it's true that in some areas the tech press has gone overboard in its criticism and has not been thoughtful. And I'm trying to provide an alternative to that in the stuff that I do. However, I think this complaint is also ignorant of the reality, and the reality, and the fact is that the reality has changed.
I really like your articulation of the current dynamic is about specialization. One thing I would push on, though, and I'm curious what you think about this, and definitely don't name any names here when it comes to how specific companies have handled their internal press. Obviously, we're doing this within On Deck, so I'm not going to, cast stones, but I want to talk about the idea of it. My skepticism of that approach has always been the domineering or dominant story of our moment is a lack of trust in basically anybody. So it's true that people don't trust the New York Times, they don't trust CNN or trust the media, but they also don't trust companies. So what I'm skeptical of is this idea that a company writes this story about how they're going to do X, Y, and Z. I don't see a company being able to convince people of that story And I think what the press laudatory stories did tell, they serve this mediating role in that form or fashion. So I'm curious how you're seeing companies successfully. I guess I made this hard by saying don't name any names, but actually, if we're being positive here, what's an example of a company doing a good job of telling the story of themselves in a world where people are skeptical of anyone saying anything?
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think that companies have done a good job doing this. I think it's, first of all, tough to write anything that's interesting. And people are like, you see it all the time that the companies are like, I'm going to start a website, a news website. And, we're going to finally bring back, the good coverage of our company and industry. And then they realize they have to actually write and edit stories. And that's actually a lot harder than they imagine. And they're slow, or they shut down, or lose a lot of money, or all the above. So I think that's difficult. I would just say that what's happened is that because, even this mediocre presence of, companies telling their own stories has emerged, it has definitely it's a poor product, but it has taken the marketplace for those stories. Now, look, I think there is an opening. If someone was going to start a new publication and was going to write about the good things that tech companies are doing and not do it funded by tech, but try to make a business out of it, there's definitely an opening for that. You could have an amazing conference business. Explain that. Well, because there's people in the audience who are interested in that. Actually, explain how that business would work. Right? What the conference? Whether you reference it's a little cynical, but if you wanted to build a good media business, you could just write really nice things about tech companies, write them well, write good features about them, and it would build a halo around your media brand, and companies would want to be featured in it, because if you did a good job writing about their competitor, you'd probably do a good job writing about them. And everybody has a great look. I'm an entrepreneur, so I know when you start a company, you have a great story. I mean, every company has a great story behind it. It takes work, and finding a market and being able to sustain a business is amazing. And so there are all these stories that sort of get lost. And then when I'm talking about the way, so how are you going to make money off of that? Well, yeah, you do a conference where you bring the tech industry together. You could probably do this for any industry, really. And you do a series of half serious panels where you say, well, how did you do that? Everybody applauds. And then you get companies that are on the rise, which have a lot of VC money to sponsor that conference.
Have a sick happy hour too.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Join us for happy hour with this crypto company that just raised $40 million on a $1 billion valuation. And it would be great business. So maybe someone should go start that. I don't know. I mean, look, I think that journalism, people have all these opinions on journalism. Ultimately, I think that we need many forms of journalism. We need the critical journalism, but we also need journalism that empowers people with information and shares stories that inspire. And so, people from the purist side were probably listening to me talk about this business idea, and they're like, oh, betrayal to the journalism class. But it's not either or, it's this and I think that, at the end of the day, the question is, are you serving the audience? Are you serving the reader? And is that making the world a better place because of it? And I think you can do it.
And I think, to your point, jokes aside, what makes this articulation you're giving not just be purely, cynical, is the fact that your claim with this media company is not, this is all there is. This is the end all be all. There are definitely people who I think would, smoke a little too much of what's around and be that aggressive. But there is just a moderate version of this, which is look, there's a pendulum. It's important to have skepticism and criticism, but all of us, I think, could cite examples of reading an article that really transformed how they see the tech industry and how inspiring that was. Tad Friend at the New Yorker did really good profiles of Mark Andreessen. I remember it from 2015. It was just, I was man, that was good. Software is eating the world, another Mark Andreessen piece in the Wall Street Journal. That's a positive piece, and a lot of folks will reference that. So I think that's interesting. We're speaking about media, so I'll ask you a media question. We're at this really weird space for our industry. I'm speaking as not on deck Marshall, but realignment breaking points Marshall, which is, BuzzFeed, obviously you worked there, but the the SPACing IPO process for all of these media companies from the 2010s has not been, I think, a particularly impressive laudatory feature. A lot of the BuzzFeed news department's getting laid off. Vice is going to have to write down its valuation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then CNN Plus clonks out in less than a month. So legacy's in this weird space. At the same time, my self-aware critique would be, I think independent media has really lagged in terms of its overall impact relative to the resources of what media companies should be doing. So I think right now, like the New York Times is just crushing it. And so much of what media was supposed to do in the 2010s, digital media was replace the Times, and it's stodgy. So that's my assessment of where it is. I think we're just at this weird halfway point. How would you assess the playing field when it comes to this state of the media bit?
Yeah, I think I'm a little more optimistic. I would say, first of all, you had a group of digital media companies who, every company that wants to raise money needs a mission and a vision, right? Like you need to be able to sell investors on something. And so if you're going to go out and raise at a really high valuation, of course you have to put the biggest, animals in your scope. And that was the New York Times saying, all right, we're going to beat the New York Times because we need your money, right? And that was always an unrealistic expectation. You're not going to be better than the New York Times with 1/10 of the editorial staff and 1/10 of the business staff. You're just not going to make an innovation that way. Now, I will say this also came into play when the New York Times was struggling. So I think comparing to old New York Times, yes, but the New York Times got its act together. It's filled with really smart people. You got to hand it to it. That business has taken off. And then also something that people probably didn't anticipate was Trump, which the Trump era definitely delivered, massive numbers of subscriptions to the Times, which then hired lots of journalists and lots of business people. And then it was sort of and then did better work. Well, we could talk about their politics, but overall, I still think it's a good paper, and then got more people to subscribe. I'm a happy New York Times subscriber. I don't agree with everything they write. I'm also a Wall Street Journal subscriber. I'm happy there too. But the Times made it worth it to pay for news. Now, the other group that you were talking about, my former employer, BuzzFeed, the Vox Media folks, Vice, they're still kicking, but they also went, they've hit some hard times. And I think that happened for a few reasons. One is because, and Ben Smith, who used to be, the editor-in-chief of BuzzFeed, wrote about this actually in his first column when he went to the New York Times. Basically, it used to be a wide open media world. And then, these papers like the Times and the Journal and the Washington Post consolidated power. And then it just became a winners and losers game. And it became really much more harder to play in the middle. And also, I would say probably the digital media companies raised too much money and set expectations way too high. And it's really hard to meet those. So, and then finally, individual media, right? That's the independent media, the stuff that I'm doing, that's happening on Substack, the stuff that you and Sagar are doing. I don't know, anyone who expected that stuff to go toe to toe with, I never expected it to go toe to toe with legacy media.
What did you expect?
I expected basically what we're seeing today. I mean, anyone with a grasp of business knows that these are tough businesses to build. And so I think that they have a ton of potential, and we're seeing some really good stuff come out of independent media right now. But we're in the very, very beginning of this. 2 years ago, no one was talking about Substack. I wrote about Substack for the first time in 2019, met 3 dudes hanging out in an apartment around the corner from me, who were we think that people will pay for emails. I'm okay, but they're here are our numbers. And I was oh, maybe this actually, can be something. But it's so early on. And I think a lot of people want to see how it looks, what the business model is. I don't even do paid subscriptions. So, I'm trying different things out. But I think to jump,
why don't you do paid subscriptions? Because for a quick thing for listeners, so much of the Substack is a very ideological company, and so much of their pitch is that ad-based media produces a weaker product than subscription-based media. So it's interesting that you're successfully on their platform but not doing subs. So why aren't you using subs?
Well, I would say it's also ideological. I have an idea that that information should be free. And when I write something, I want the maximum amount of people to be able to read it. And advertising enables me to do that. And I would say the bone I have to pick with Substack's argument is that they say ads are bad incentive. I think trying to do ads on volume for social media is bad incentive. But I think you could do targeted ads to a dedicated audience.
Can you explain what ads at volume of social media, what does that mean?
Yeah, sorry. So I'll just talk about like okay, well, I'll just say like I used to write for the web, right? Write for social media audiences. That was the whole idea at BuzzFeed. And, so essentially like, and there was, of course, like we never heard from the business side, like, oh, you need to, get more traffic. It happens in some places, never happened at BuzzFeed.
So there was no big chart with your numbers. Because some people did that. That wasn't you guys.
Gawker had that. We never had that. I mean, basically like well, that's not true. We did sometimes get emails with traffic. But basically the idea is you wanted to write impactful stories that would spread on Facebook and Twitter and help grow the audience. But the thing is, something goes viral on Twitter, someone clicks in, they go, they're not your audience, they were traffic. And I just don't think it's healthy, because eventually in order to reach those people, you have to, make them mad, make them super passionate. But often making people super passionate involves making them mad or play to their identities. I just don't think that's a healthy way to do media. I think a healthy way to do media is to build a relationship with an audience. And email and podcasts are amazing for that, because, if this podcast sucks, then, good luck getting people to come back next week. And if this podcast is great, well, then people will probably come back. So there's a premium on quality and premium on respecting the reader and the listener, which I think is amazing with email and podcasts. That's why I'm in those businesses. And I think that this idea that ads are bad is misplaced. I think subscriptions can generate just as, similarly negative incentives. But I do think that, as long as you're in email and as long as you're in podcasts, things that people ask for versus things that you push to them, you're going to be incentivized to do better work. So I'll just to wrap up the last point. I think that what we're seeing in independent media right now through subscription, through podcasting, is amazing. I think it only has room to grow. And we're going to see lots of growth, and people will jump and do different things that you and I haven't thought of. And it's just going to be cool to watch. Like, this is now a category. It wasn't 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
So you referred to yourself as an entrepreneur earlier in the episode, and that's a key thing that you need to do when you go independent. There are a lot of folks at our business who are incredible at editorial. They're great interviewers, they're great writers, but they aren't going to be people who anyone would want running a business. I think a key thing that you've told me in the past is that you actually worked on the business side before mm-hmm. everything. So it's not as if you're coming completely tabula rasa, but can you just talk about that transition from being a person writing for social to running a business that's based around yourself? Like, that's just this has been people have written about this. Like, there are lots of folks like Charlie Rozelle at the Atlantic, he went independent from the New York Times. He tried Galaxy Brain. He's like, hey, look, this isn't for me. He went back and is back in that space. Like, how has this been for you?
I mean, it has been unbelievable. It's been super fun. But you have to love, in order to do it, you have to really love being an entrepreneur. And I really take your point that a lot of people work in editorial do not love being entrepreneurs. So that's why, like, I don't think that the New York Times will ever be, or like we're using this New York Times as like an example, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think they're ever going to be in trouble from the type of people who do work like I do. I mean, we'll probably kick their butts eventually, like trying to, we'll probably get better stories and stuff like that. But like, there's always going to be a group of journalists who just don't want to take the risk.
Can I say one thing? Because I want to get your response to this. Here's what the New York Times will be threatened by. Because you're being because like, I'm trying to unpack this for listeners. You said journalists, op-ed writers who are dramatically underpaid. That is who the New York Times will lose. And by the New York Times, we mean just like the general broad mainstream media. So Andrew Sullivan, he's making $400K. Well, he makes over $1 million now, right? Like Matt Yglesias, same category. So I think what was true is the New York Times, Washington Post, Atlantic, New York Magazine, they were underpaying opinion writers relative to how much people were willing to pay for them. But that's different than the dynamics with the journalist.
Correct. Yeah, I think that's totally right. And also, like, with people like Andrew and people like Yglesias, like, they produce a level of work that's so good or so well liked by so many readers that they build communities. I mean, they build like adherence to people who, and by the way, this is all roundabout ways of me saying what they have are audiences. People who have audiences are going to be the people that do really well in this world. And, again, like they'll be writing on a platform, like a mainstream platform, but they're going to have dedicated readers that come back week after week after week and read what they have to write. And oftentimes there's people who will write with the point of view, but it doesn't always have to be.
Did you have dedicated readers at BuzzFeed?
I mean, I definitely had people who were like reading my stuff, but it was smaller than I have today. And there's a reason for that. It's because, and I loved being a reporter at BuzzFeed. It was super fun and I learned a ton, and it was fearless too, which was great. It was like, well, I'm like, they have 4 reporters on it. They're like, go get the story and don't come back to me until you have it. Like, that's really the attitude you need to have. You can never feel small in these roles if you're actually going to want to compete. And I've taken that with me. But that being said, like, I don't know. It is. So my audience has grown now because back then I had to be a part of a system. So this news is breaking, go cover it. This news is breaking, go cover it. This is breaking, go cover it. What big story do you have for me today? It wasn't cohesive. It wasn't coherent. It was for the publication. It wasn't for the individual. What I have now is the ability to assign myself stories. What I have now is the ability to actually be cohesive and coherent of a point of, and have topics that people can come back to me and know I'm going to weigh in on and want to come and hear like my perspective, and they want to come hear like the way that I report these things. So it's much easier to drive like your own ship on that front, and I think that is really conducive to actually like building an audience.
Yeah, and something I'm curious about, I want to get to the last section, which is talking about tech stories, but just on your front, from a news you can use perspective, you are across so many different platforms and styles. So you're a CNBC contributor, you post on YouTube, you tweet, you write a Substack, you host a podcast. Like I actually struggled. Do you do TikTok?
No, I don't do TikTok.
Okay, so if you posted TikToks, you would actually complete the trifecta. Like it's more of a trifecta. But seriously, like you're one of the most versatile people in our space. And a lot of people who are, and I'm sure you've seen this on Twitter, founders, operators, VCs, everyone's trying to be a content person now. Can you walk us through your opinions on your experiences in these different types of content? Why aren't you on TikTok? How, like just those different bits.
Definitely. It's interesting. So I actually like started when I made my way into media, like originally through broadcast stuff. Like I co-hosted a sports talk radio show on air through NASA Community College's radio station, WHPC for all of those in Long Island. And I did that like Tuesdays and Thursdays, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. for like a couple of years while I was in high school. Because I was like, I really liked the show. I called the guys up. They're like, yeah, we could always use some more help.
Wow.
One day they actually no one showed up. And like the producer looked at me and they're like, are you ready to go on air? And I had like 2 hours in the newspaper. And I was like, let's do this, which was super fun. So I always liked broadcast, but I think the key is really learning how to write and learning how to report underpins everything I do. Like I really needed to do that. And it was a process. And like if people are want to know, like writing is hard, and writing is like, part art, but a lot of it is science. And if people want to like know how to do that, there's a book that my editor at BuzzFeed handed me, which I thought was an insult at the time, but really helped a lot. It's called On Writing Well. Just read the first 100 pages. I promise you'll always write better than you did before reading it. Taught me a ton. So I think, so it starts with, for me with the writing. And the writing is nice because like, it's like I get to call multiple sources that way and then put what I learn into a story. So like, you could call 10 people, but get 800 words out of it. And that's awesome. Mm-hmm. The podcast, actually, I really started the podcast because going independent, I was worried that I wasn't going to have an excuse to speak to interesting people anymore. Like I knew I could email them, but I figured I had a much better chance of like getting like, the guy that runs WhatsApp to pick up the phone to talk to me if he knew that like that would be an episode on a podcast. And like in year one, Will Cathcart, who runs WhatsApp, came on the show. Would he have done that for my Substack? Probably not. And so that's kind of how I, got into that world. And I think that like podcasts and newsletters are like pretty similar. It's again, a relationship with the audience. If this is good, you'll come back. If it sucks, you'll unsubscribe, or you won't open anymore, or you won't click anymore to listen. So those are the two core parts of my business. And I think they jive really well together. And sometimes you get such an interesting interview, you write it up as the newsletter and, and everyone's happy. And then, so broadcast, I had done a little bit of broadcast, when I was at BuzzFeed. I remember showing up to CNBC for the first time in like 2016, talking about how it was actually kind of a fun segment. It was talking about how people who post on social media were going to get paid by these platforms. And like this whole idea of user generated content was a fallacy. And they're like, oh yeah, come talk to us about that. Cause I spoke with some people and figured out what was going to go down.
Was that take correct?
Oh yeah, definitely.
I don't know anything about that. Please.
Well, think
expand.
about, TikTok, Facebook, they all have creator funds right now. And so my theory was that social media was moving to video. Making video is really hard. And so therefore there's few video creators, and platforms that succeed will succeed on the backs of their creators. And there's going to be competition for those people. So they're going to pay them. And how TikTok has a massive creator fund, Facebook has a creator fund, and Spotify, for instance, right? Is now paying hundreds of millions of dollars for podcasts. So this proved even truer than I expected. And I think it will eventually start to look like these platforms are programming, similar to TV.
And this is an ideas show, so I want to get to this idea that you just mentioned. You were arguing against this user-generated content. Can you explain what was the conventional wisdom that you were pushing back on?
The conventional wisdom was if you build it, they will come. Build the platform. If the platform's good enough, people will, post because there's enough incentive to be posting on the platform and build an audience that way. But it turns out it's really difficult to make money from large audiences on social media. And so this idea that there are endless amounts of users that will generate endless amounts of content for you, and all you have to build are the pipes, essentially, was completely wrong. And it's actually you build the pipes and then you fill them with really good stuff and you pay for that stuff. And then you'll probably get a long tail of people who are oh, I want to do that video too, or I want to use that platform to try to be like them. So that's kind of what social media developed into. And here's a fun story. So Twitter, this was right around the time when Twitter had Vine.
I was going to bring up Vine next, so go there. Yeah. Please.
And this is why Vine crumbled. Vine was the original TikTok, the original, et cetera, et cetera. It was the OG of these type of short form video platforms. And it had a very dynamic, creative creator group, influencer group, whatever you want to call them. And these folks are look at the volume on Vine. Not everybody's making Vine videos. These things are tough to make, but people love watching Vine videos. So what are we doing? Making these videos, making some money, but not a lot. And then basically
were they just getting sponsorships?
Yeah, creating sponsorships.
Outside, right?
Correct, yeah. And then
terrible. Talk about a not scalable business.
Exactly, yeah. And then they're we're making Twitter billions of dollars here. What are we doing? So they actually went and had a meeting with Twitter. And they're pay us. And Twitter said no. And then that was it. They're all right, we're out. And they all went to Snapchat and YouTube. And they turned those places into pretty vibrant, media places. And YouTube and Snapchat ended up paying them. So Snapchat originally ignored them, but they learned the lesson from Vine. They paid them. Now and then Vine shut down. And then the movement went to Snapchat and YouTube. And now TikTok is all right, we have all the momentum. I don't know what the number is. I think it's either 100 million or a billion, some crazy amount of money that they're paying people to make videos on the site. And so I think that social media is a lot less organic than some people think, with some examples.
What's interesting there is you're getting at what eventually develops into the, creator economy thesis. I'm curious what you think of and I think crypto kind of ate the creator economy hype space, but you're also a creator yourself. So I'm just curious, like, what are your just current thoughts on like that trend, that dynamic? How big is the market? I mean, I was talking with some people who are serious creators, and they always laugh at there are 50 million creators in America. I think, no, there's not. Like this is the number is nowhere near that big. And you're really like, am I creating when I post like an Instagram? Like that's how like wide you're expanding that. So what do you think about the general idea?
Yeah, I think that it got blown out of proportion, but it's really real. Like the thing that I'm talking about these platforms paying people, that's real, and they can make livings from that, or they can do advertising and make livings from that. I think there's a lot of people that can do it, but like the idea that there can be 50 million people making money by posting on Instagram is not true.
So we'll wrap with just the following question. Like you're writing and discussing these like weekly tech stories. Like what is, so two questions. Question one is, what is like the broad narrative about tech that's interesting and driving you right now?
Well, I mean, I like to pay attention to the markets. Like this is definitely, my work with CNBC is definitely like cued me into this in a way that I was paying attention to before, but like wasn't reading every earnings report the way I am now. And the market right now is absolutely insane. It's insane. Every tech company you look at, if they're down 40% on the year, you're like, oh, that's pretty good. Some are down like 60, 70%. Like look at Netflix, for instance. Netflix was at like, I don't know, it was $600 something, last September, $690 maybe, something that high. I looked yesterday, they're under $200 per stock. So they've lost 2/3 of their value. And what happens to companies when they go through changes like this? I mean, people are like, we don't look at the stock price. Oh, come on. Of course they do. And if the executives have figured out a way to not do that, their employees certainly are. And their employees have been paid, a lot of them in stock. So I think there are big shifts that are going on in the tech world because of the financial side of things. And they're going to continue. I mean, we're about to have the Fed raise the rate for the first, I think it's maybe the first or the second time in a long time. And that rate's going to keep going up. We might end up in a recession. I mean, we'll see about the depression, but we might end up in a recession. We have inflation. That's crazy. Think about all the companies that like sell things to you through Instagram and Facebook. Like people are starting to conserve their money, like $30 impulse purchase that you would make on Instagram now is a lot more consequential when the government isn't giving you a monthly check. And your money is worth 8% less. So, those companies are going to have a ton of trouble that way. I mean, you have the war in Ukraine that's definitely changing things in the global economy in ways that we're just starting to feel. So I think that the tech world is going to be an economic story in a big way. And what does that lead to? And here's one example. Just to bring it full circle, Elon Musk buying Twitter is a product of this economy. Twitter its valuation dropped actually from like $70 a share to a place where giving them $54.20 is something the board couldn't turn down, right? So 6 months ago, Elon probably wasn't making this move. That would have cost him probably $70-80 billion. He's just going to be able to squeak by with the money that he has, unless he was like fully ready to basically leverage Tesla in order to buy Twitter. He's not quite there yet. So it creates really interesting moments and opportunities in this world. And how many tech companies are going to end up getting a activist investor, getting acquired, getting a position by, private equity. It's going to be wild, and it really might change like the face of the tech industry.
Yeah, it's really, it's very, because my answer to this question is basically, and this is an obvious narrative, but just like coming down from the pandemic high, right? Like Peloton, Netflix. So here's actually, let's talk about Netflix for a second for the final question.
Yeah.
How do you guard yourself when you're doing this against just like conventional wisdom, right? In the sense that Netflix beats Blockbuster. I think so many folks did not have it in their heads that what's happening at Netflix was at all possible. Like we were just all raving about Squid Game. And people, I really like Puck, and they did a good, Matthew Bellini did a good thing on Netflix, and he said that, look, like his thesis is if Squid Game hadn't come out in Q4, almost certainly this bad news would have happened earlier. In terms of like the general just like vibe crash, to use a technical term. So just like how do you just like evaluate and look at these companies without just getting swallowed by just like the narrative?
Yeah, it's a cliche answer, but the way to do it is through reporting. So like, rather than just like posting my thoughts on the Substack and like doing monologues on the podcast, like I really try to learn from people who know a lot more than me and try to bring those ideas to the audience. So during like the whole meme stock and, market run up, I mean, the market was insane last year, insane. I mean, the multiples on some of these stocks were just totally out of control, and we're starting to see like the contraction now. So I would have people like Ranjan Roy on the podcast. Ranjan is like one of the most astute financial analysts that I know. He writes a great newsletter on Substack called Margins. And Ranjan's been on the show like 5 times, and it's just been like, all right, Ranjan, like what the heck is happening here? And like sometimes we talk about like the nuts and bolts, like how interest rate policy leads to crazy valuations and where does money go in that situation. And I think that just like doing that, like speaking to people, and then also just like, I think that a lot of people, I'm an optimist. Like I'm not, sometimes like journalists are afraid to admit when they're optimists, but I'm definitely an optimist. I believe like we're heading in a good direction, and that tech is good for the world on the whole. But like I definitely like you can't let your optimism cloud out reality. And like, for instance, like when you see, you can't sometimes, and I think sometimes with Netflix, people discounted the fact that the government was printing money and handing it out to people. People discounted the fact that there were all these other competitors like Disney, Paramount Plus, Hulu. I forgot how many. I got COVID like in December and just like signed up for all of them, and then immediately unsubscribed. To almost all.
Can I tell you my fun fact for the episode? Yeah. I am a streaming service addict. I subscribe to CNN Plus. I just got my refund. I subscribed to Quibi. I broke my iPhone, and a point of pride was me having, with my old one, the Quibi app still on. It can't re-download now. So I think I'm subscribed to. What am I not subscribed to? Paramount Plus. I have Peacock. I have Hulu. I think I'm subscribed to every single one right now. Geez, that's. So my actual rationalization here is it's cable.
Yeah.
If you add up what I'm paying all together, I am paying a cable bundle, and it means that there's just always something on. I'm gonna keep them.
Yeah, I go back and forth. Like I'll do like Netflix for a while, then I'll just like watch everything I need to. Go to HBO, watch everything I need to. Go to Showtime. Like
you said, I don't pay for. There we go. I don't pay for Showtime, and I don't actually pay for Netflix. I'm on the family plan still, and I do, and it's weird. Like I don't feel much of an urge to subscribe to Netflix. If my parents cut me off, I think that's part of the problem, right? Like HBO Max is like, I'm obsessed with HBO Max now, just like consistently. That was the CNN Plus disaster, right? Like just add it as a section on CNN Plus.
CNN Plus thing is real bad. Just like, well, I'm sure we could talk about that for an hour, but. Holy hell!
Yeah, no, that's a whole other podcast. But people could guess our feelings.
Right, I know Alex, it really it surprised Sagar. He was astonished that it didn't work. So
yeah, no, like it's been bad for his ego. So I'm actually not. I kind of wish they'd made it like a few more months, but we'll have to deal with that on the talent side. Alex, this has been really great. Could you? Because I really like, this is a podcast and I really like your podcast. Started listening before we even like met. What is an episode? Because all podcasters have these episodes. What's just like an episode that people should check out?
Yeah,
you do a lot. Like you're publishing every week. So like, what is one that sticks out?
We have one this week with Rich Greenfield that goes into more depth. He's an analyst. He covers like media, Netflix, and all that stuff. We have an episode coming out Wednesday that talks about like all the different media stocks. Like we go into all the factors: inflation, rate being raised, Ukraine, et cetera, and we just go through all the the different different permutations there. I would say that one, check that one out. I mean, there's one that I did last week with Alex Redder, who is used to be the head of engineering at Twitter, and we walked through every single one of Elon Musk's proposals. And I'm like, all right, Alex,
cool.
tell me pragmatically like how this would work, and like, can you envision them being A, feasible, and B, advisable? Now, warning to folks, I was dealing with like nasty allergies. My voice in that episode is gone. If you can tolerate that, check it out, because Alex is amazing in that show.
That's awesome. Well, Alex, speaking of amazing shows, thank you for joining us on the deep end. And I suggest that all of our listeners check out the Big Technology Substack and podcast.
Thanks, Marshall. Always great to talk. Really appreciate you having me here.